being said, John, our player profile this week is in one of those positions of need. However, there's a caveat. He's not really the three tech position that they need in terms of a true pass rushing interior defensive lineman. I went with this guy because I've been, sifting through some mocks, and some of those show up on my Twitter timeline and all kinds of different things. And there was one that popped up. I really can't remember which one it was, to be quite honest with you. I've seen a lot, so I wish I could credit the exact one. But this player was mocked to the Bengals in the middle of the draft. I believe it was a 4th round pick. And, we talk about guys that, will be 1st round pick, 2nd round pick, potentially. Those are usually the guys that we profile on here because those are bigger names, a little bit more well known. This is a guy who probably will be, at best, a round 3 pick in this year's class, more likely a day 3 pick of some kind, because of some positional limitations and what teams look for out of interior defensive linemen in various capacities these days. Still, he's a guy that flashes some things that really intrigues you. And I'm going to hopefully pronounce his name. The way I've understood his name to be pronounced is Otito Ogbonnia. And he is interior defensive lineman from UCLA, a guy I knew a little bit about just watching some Pac-12, but I kind of watched some more things and got into him more as I have seen him mocked to the Bengals. And, when you see the Logan Halls mocked to the Bengals and you see the Travis Joneses and whatnot mocked to the Bengals as, kind of some of these interior linemen in the first couple of rounds, those are kind of some of the usual suspect names. But we have to remember too, John, even whether it's a 3 tech, like a Geno Atkins, whether it's a true big dude like Pat Sims, the gap eater, the run stopper guy like a Pat Sims, 3rd round, 4th round, that's their bread and butter, where they like to get a lot of defensive tackles traditionally, and they have done so with Duke Tobin. They did so as recently as last year. When you look at Tyler Shelvin on to start off day 3, you look at Cam Sample, kind of a versatile defensive lineman that played outside, play a little inside on some pass rushing situations. So they like those mid rounds to potentially find. And the list goes on and on and on about defense. Geno Atkins, Pat Sims, Andrew Billings, Tyler Shelvin. Those mid round guys that's where they like to go with a lot of times for some of these guys that maybe not the premium names in the draft, but a player that they feel could help them in either a rotational basis or something of that nature. So here is a little bit on Otito Ogbonnia. I will full screen this for everybody to look at here. Again, UCLA, 6'4", 324, big old guy, a senior. He's 21, turns 22 late. It will in the regular season here. He had 29 bench press reps, which is the most for a defensive player at the combine. Actually had 31, but they docked 2 because of some technicalities in terms of how he was bench pressing, I guess. But at the same time, strong guy, big guy. The other thing with him, John, and this is where I get confused on who this player actually is and what he can do. There you see here's some of the stats and accolades. 27 total tackles last year, 5 of them for loss. He did have 2 sacks, not necessarily known as a true pass rusher type of guy, but got to the quarterback a couple times, got in the backfield a few times last year. Did have 1 forced fumble last year. And then, of course, we have the 2022 78.3 pass rush grade, 2nd team all Pac-12 as graded by PFF there. So you can see there's some stats there. There's some things to like. And when you move on here, this is where some of the questions come up, right? There's some pros where you say, hey, he's an athlete because he played track early in his career at UCLA and football. He's got ideal size, length, and strength. When you talk about arm length, he had like the 5th longest arms at the combine for defensive linemen. I mentioned the 6'4", 325 size, the bench press, all of that. You can see 4.3 nose, maybe some work on some multiple fronts. And then he's got the high character, good work ethic by most accounts. Is he a limited athlete, though, in terms of, when he's out there actually playing, even though he's played multiple sports? Is he just a big, strong guy? And this, by the way, this is a unique clip from the Senior Bowl. This is him going up against, I believe, Zion Johnson here. And Zion had some trouble with him. And Zion Johnson looking like, he's a guy that's probably going to be a late first-round pick. Here's a couple of reps here that we'll share just to kind of finish up a little bit here. But here he just beats him, right? And the first time there was kind of some joking there about, a holding penalty or holding flags in the drills. They don't normally do that at the Senior Bowl, but in a couple reps there, he had beat Zion Johnson once where Zion was holding him, and then he just beat him right off the snap there when Zion was doing some interior. I think he was playing kind of a center position there in that drill. But my point is when you look at this player, he's a multi-sport athlete, so you like that he's athletic, but when you look at kind of the lower body, when you look at the speed, and I'll bring up his RAS in a minute here, there's some real questions on his actual athleticism. So the question is he a good athletic football player, or is he just a big, strong guy? Because I think in track, his event was shot put. So is he just a big, strong guy? And just because he's big and strong, he did some nice things in college, and that's kind of that and won't translate well in the NFL. But I don't know how much you've looked at this guy. I'll pull up his RAS in a minute, but I don't know if you have some initial thoughts on him.
His RAS is going to be dominated by the fact that he's 6'3", 320. But, I mean, that's 5'3", I believe it was, at that size. I think that puts him in the 32nd percentile for all nose tackles since, like, the 2000 draft. He is a track athlete. He didn't run track, so am I going to catch flack here for saying that, shot put throwers and discus throwers aren't necessarily, like, track athletes? I know it's like still in the name, but like he didn't run, so like I feel like with track it kind of comes with like, oh, you ran, but no, I think he chose UCLA because he wanted to play football and track, which is really cool. Like I think that does take a certain level of balance and athleticism, but for a defensive tackle, like he's a nose, like he's almost 330 pounds, doesn't have any real production profile of a guy who can rush the passer. And again, like I don't think he tested. I think he had a hamstring injury at the combine, which is why he didn't have a full testing profile. But a 5'3", 140 at his pro day, when presumably he was maybe a little bit more healthy, like he's not expected to penetrate any gaps. He's supposed to hold his own. And I feel like he was just adequate at best at that at UCLA. So I just look at a guy who, he's a decent football player. He's still young, and there might be some room for growth in terms of athleticism because he's still young, but the lack of production does kind of scare me, even though he's like a nose tackle and his job is mostly just to plug the gaps. But most of those good nose tackles in college to end up being good nose tackles in the NFL, they still are, around the ball a decent amount and get into the backfield. And that just wasn't really the case. 21 forced fumbles. Just kidding. No.
Yeah, I know.
He did have 2 though in college, and he did play a lot in college. So like he was a starter, I believe, in 2018, and then he continued all 4 years as a starter. He did miss a little time here and there, but I mean, all in all, I think he's a solid player. If it takes a 3rd round pick to pick him, I think that might be a little bit too early. You just might let some other team just take that risk because again, there's not a ton to go off here. Like you don't know the rest of his athleticism. The production is not great. The potential to be a pass rusher is not high. And then from a Bengals lens, they have 3 nose tackles on the roster under contract for the next 2 years. So like what is his role going to be? If you want him on the team, just, to be like a reserve at this position, then you might as well wait as long as possible to pick him. But again, if it takes a 3rd, 4th round pick to select him, it's almost like you're better off just maybe selecting someone else.
Yeah. This is a guy that sometimes has been linked to the Bengals, but like you said, there are some, they're deep at this specific role. You may be able to, place him in certain other areas on the line, but he's pretty limited in terms of what you can do there. And he's basically, the one technique, 4.3 nose, like you said. And here's the RAS score, 4.75 overall, the great size grade, but very poor speed grade. And nothing there with explosion or agility. Here's the thing. And I don't know if this is going to make sense or not. And when I say this, but he's a guy that shows, and you can see if you go back to that Senior Bowl practice tape there, and I'm going to put the link to that video in our live chats, and I'll pin it in our show description as well, so you can kind of see that for yourself and check out that. But he's a guy that is known to get pass blockers, to penetrate and get pass blockers. It's what does he do when he's there, right?
Yeah.
When he gets past the block, the limited athleticism and the size, he has the size and the strength to get past blocks, the bull rush and all of that. He can get past blocks. He has shown that. The problem is when he's there and has penetrated, his limited athleticism doesn't necessarily allow him to make the wow play, the quarterback sack, the big tackle for loss, etc. So I think that's, if that makes sense, that's kind of my takeaway in reading about him and watching him. He can get past blocks. There's no doubt about it. It's just, what does he do when he's there? There's just not a ton of production after getting past the block. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to like what is your plan as a pass rusher? Are you winning just off just pure size, brute strength, and speed and whatnot? Is that going to fly in the next level when the offensive linemen are a little bit more competent with their hands? But getting into the backfield, like you said, is half the battle. Like finding the ball carrier, keeping your pads squared to the line, and keeping your feet moving and having some sense of balance. That's all part of actually finishing the plays. Like the penetration and the pressure is only half the battle. It's actually finishing it that actually counts on the stat sheet and on the score sheet, and actually finishing the play. So I think an interesting prospect altogether. I think what is the most intriguing is the fact that he's already physically developed at this point, like almost 35-inch arms, 330 pounds almost, and he's only 21 years old. So there's a lot to like there, that he's physically mature, but there's still more that you could probably get out of him. It's just a matter of how much do you want to risk taking a guy that hasn't had a lot of production, has an incomplete athletic profile. He probably does find himself in the middle of the draft for those reasons. And if the Bengals feel like they can carve out a role for him, maybe they see him as a 5 technique. Maybe they see him as a guy that can play, heads up with the tackle because of that length, and a guy that can hold his own in a 2-gap perspective. Maybe that is the role that they see for him. I don't know, but I think all the other factors indicate that he's probably going to be in that 4th, maybe 5th round range. And if he goes early, good luck to that team.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think he's going to be a Cincinnati Bengal. If they chose him, that would probably signal some trouble potentially for Tyler Shelvin. That he didn't get a lot of time last year, or like you said, maybe they've got some alternative plans for him to move him around in a couple different spots. But I wouldn't necessarily bank on him being a Cincinnati Bengal. I've just seen him mocked and talked about a handful of times to the Bengals, and a guy, obviously Pac-12, and some of that, length, size, weight, strength profile just kind of jumps at you, right? And so you say, how does this guy potentially make sense for the Bengals, if at all?